Imagine you are in a besieged city. The doors are closed. The air smells of fear. Outside, 185,000 bloodthirsty soldiers await the order to destroy everything. There is no escape. There is no reinforcements. And what worse, it seems that not even God will answer. But what if I told you that that night God, yes, acted? What if I told you that battle was not fought by men, but by the same Creator, in complete silence without witnesses, and that no one, absolutely no one, saw as occurred? This is the story of a divine war, a night forgotten by many, but recorded in the most mysterious pages of the Old Testament. One night in the one God came down and fought alone. Stay with me until the end of this video. Don't close this window. Because what you're about to hear can change the way you see things, faith, divine power, and the way God works when all seems lost. Because what happened that evening in Jerusalem was not just an act of power, it was a revelation about how heaven answers when the earth cries out. In the year 701 BC, the ancient world was shaking under the weight of Empire Assyrian, a war machine feared by all. They were known for their brutality, for its thirst for conquest, and to destroy everything they touched. When they arrived in Jerusalem, not only did they bring swords, they brought blasphemies. The king Assyrian, Sennacherib, dared to do it unthinkable, to directly challenge the God of Israel. He sent letters full of insults, mocking of the Most High, saying that no one God of none nation had saved his people, and that Jerusalem, it would be just another conquest. But within those walls, a man did something different. He didn't raise a sword, he didn't call the generals. Instead, he knelt. This story is not just history, it is a spiritual declaration. It is a warning to the arrogant. And it is a silent promise to those who still believe, even when the world is falling apart. If you are one of those people who still believes in the invisible power of God, I want you to write now in the comments the following sentence. Believe in the God who fights for me, even though nobody at sea. Do it now. Declare it. Don't think twice. Because this story, this silent night, is for you, to remind you that you are not alone. That even when all seems lost, there is a God who fights your battles in the secret. And if you dare to stay with me until the end, I promise you will find out a mystery so deep, so powerful, that your faith will never be the same again. Now, get ready, because the enemy already has surrounded the city, and what comes next is the beginning of a story that the world wanted to forget, but the heaven took care of preserving. The sound of war drums resonates beyond the walls. The sun barely rises, and already you can see the dust raised by the feet of an army colossal. They are 185,000 men, soldiers hardened by blood, hardened by conquest. They don't seek to negotiate. They don't seek surrender. They only seek to submit. Jerusalem had never seen anything like it. Stories of Assyrian terror were told as a warning to the children, but now they were a real threat. They were there, surrounding every entrance, watching every shadow. The hearts of the inhabitants trembled like leaves. In the storm, the Empire Assyrian, under the command of the feared king Sennacherib, was the most devastating military force in the known world. They didn't conquer. They devastated. Their power was not only in their weapons, but in his methodical cruelty. They beheaded prisoners, hung bodies on stakes, and recorded their victories in stone so that the memory of the fear never died. And now that same empire was in front of the doors of the temple of God. But the horror did not end with the physical presence of the enemy. There was something worse, something more poisonous than the spears. Sennacherib shipment messengers with letters full of mockery, arrogance, blasphemy, letters in which not only challenged the king Hezekiah, but to the God of Israel himself. Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? Could they will save their lands, so your God will not save you from my hand. said one of them. "Imagine receiving a letter like that. Imagine being locked up, besieged, knowing that no one army has never been able to defeat the Assyrians. Imagine that the enemy laughs at you, faith, of your hope, from your God. The walls of Jerusalem seem more fragile than ever, streets empty of joy, the people on the verge of spiritual collapse, because it wasn't just a war of armies, it was a war of faith. And this is where many, they would have taken up the sword, they would have tried to negotiate, they would have sought desperate human solutions, but it was not what happened. Because this chapter of the history is not designed to exalt the force of the man, but to expose the pride of the enemy before his fall. It is the moment when the darkness they seem to reign, just before the light manifests. Sennacherib, confident in his record of victories, in its military power, in his policy of terror, he thought that Jerusalem I would be other trophy more. I didn't understand that I wasn't challenging a people, was challenging the God of that town, and that one error, that arrogance, it would be his sentence. Meanwhile, inside the city, the king Hezekiah received those letters with a pale face, but with the determined soul. I knew I didn't have his win. I knew that weapons wouldn't be enough, but he knew something else, that his God was not like the idols of the other nations. He was the living God. And if there is something that the enemy can never calculate, that's what happens when a broken heart prostrates itself in prayer. Outside, soldiers were sharpening their swords. Inside, a man was preparing his soul to speak with darling. What is about to happen is unprecedented, because this battle, it will not be decided by force, but by a divine intervention that will change the course of the history. But first, there is a king who needs to take the most important decision of your life. There is no silence heavier than that of a city that waits the death, Jerusalem. I had seen many threats throughout the centuries, but none like this. The fear was palpable. Their eyes met in the streets, seeking solace where there was no certainty. And in he palace, a man I trembled, not because of a lack of faith, but because of the gravity of the moment. The king Hezekiah was not just any leader. He was a man who had restored the worship in the temple, which had broken the pagan altars, which had guided the people toward the light in middle of the spiritual darkness. But now he was alone, completely alone before the elderly threat to his reign. In his hands he held the letter sent by Sennacherib, a letter that was not only an insult to his kingdom, but a direct mockery of his God. And yet Hezekiah did not broke it, not the ignored it, not her hid. He took her to the temple, with slow steps crossed the sacred courtyards. The sun was setting, the city he murmured behind the walls, but he advanced to the place where only those who truly believed knelt. And there, with the open letter, the extended in front of the mister, this was not a political act. It was not a symbolic gesture. It was a cry from the soul. It was a heart-rending cry. It was heart of a broken king, who knew that his only refuge was the God who had promised to be a shield and tower in day of the distress. The words of his prayers were not long or complicated. There were no magic formulas or theatricality, only truth, only faith, only a born plea from the breakdown. Lord God of Israel, enthroned among the cherubs, only you are God over all the kingdoms of the land. You did he sky and the earth. Incline, O Lord, your ear and listen. Open, O Lord, your eyes and look. Listen the words that Sennacherib has sent to insult the living God. Hezekiah did not ask strategies. He didn't ask for revenge. He didn't ask for glory. He only asked that God show himself, that his name was not profaned, that his people did not lose the faith, that in some way the darling responded. And in that prayer, there is revealed heart of someone who has reached the human limit and has decided to trust beyond what visible, because the faith is not ignoring the danger, it is to look at the eyes, and still so, believe that God has the last word. This moment in the temple was more powerful than 1,000 armies. It was an act of total surrender. And that surrender touched he, darling. God is not indifferent to sincere cries. And when a man of authority humbles himself before him, the sky moves, the universe listens, the doors of the supernatural open. What Hezekiah didn't know, and what he may have known neither you know still, is that while he prayed, for an answer already was in path. An intervention that would change everything without him had to move a single soldier. The prayer of one man, made in intimacy, would soon become in the cause of a victory that would shake empires. Because sometimes what happens in secret is more powerful than any public demonstration. Hezekiah handed over the letter. God would take he conflict as his own, and when he takes on a battle, the history is transformed. Hezekiah's prayer did not fall in he empty. The sky, which seemed silently, he was more attentive than ever, and while he king still remained in position of humility, the prophet Isaiah received a word, not a suggestion, not a possibility, a divine declaration with the weight of the eternity. Isaiah, the man of the lips purified by fire, the spokesperson for the invisible, appeared before him king with a certainty that was not born from logic, but from deep faith. His words were not ambiguous. There were none margin for the doubt. So it says he, Lord, he shall not enter this city. He shall not shoot a single arrow. He shall not approach with a shield. He shall not build siege ramps against it. By the way he came, he will return, because I will defend this city, for the love of me myself, and for the love of my servant David. It was like a thunder in half of the fear. A voice that cut the air is thick with uncertainty. The people knew still, but a promise had just sealed your destiny. Think about it. You're cornered. The enemy is armed to the bone. Teeth. He has thousands of men, war machinery, bloodlust, and a man alone with a worn tunic and a burning gaze tells you, don't worry, nothing is going to happen. God has already decided. Would you believe that was exactly what is said? Asked Hezekiah, not a military action, not a strategic response. He was asked faith in the word that didn't have still evidence, faith in a voice that came of the sky and that crashed with all human logic. And here is the deep conflict of this chapter, the abyss between what we see and what God promises, between the army encamped and the statement that not one arrow will be launched, between the power of the world and the power of the prophetic word. Isaiah spoke with authority because he did not speak for himself. He knew the heart of God. I knew that when he speak, don't do it makes, to fill silence, but to transform the reality. And the most shocking thing of all is that this promise did not depend on the force of the people, nor of their military preparation, nor of any foreign ally. It depended only from the God's faithfulness to his word. He won't come in, he said. Mister. But the army continued over there. He won't shoot an arrow, he promised. But the archers were still prepared. What happened was a sacred space between the promise and the compliance, a space where the faith is tested, where silence becomes on a spiritual battlefield, where it is decided whether we trust or retreat, and that one space is known to all those who walk with God, because before every miracle there is a moment of waiting, a sigh where the soul wonders, what if it doesn't happen? But Isaiah did not hesitate. Hezekiah did not question. The word was given. Heaven there was spoken. And when he speaks, everything others has to be quiet. In the Assyrian camps, the soldiers laughed. They were sure of their victory. In the palaces of Jerusalem, the lamps were burning while the faithful they prayed. No one knew how, nor when or how, but something was about to happen. Because when God issues a decree, he does not need human help to accomplish it. The battle had been taken over by the Most High. The pride of the mighty would be brought down, and the town I would learn, once again, that the real wars are not won with swords, but with words that come from the eternal throne. The night fell over Jerusalem like a blanket of uncertainty. There were no sounds of war. There were no alarms, only silence. A silence so thick as it seemed to anticipate something, as if the universe contained the breathing. Within the walls, the town I was sleeping, or at least I was tried, knowing that beyond its gates a gigantic threat awaited. But what no one I knew, what neither not even Hezekiah or Isaiah could imagine, was that night would not be like any other. That would be at the evening that God would come down and fight alone. The Bible, in 2 Kings 19:35, says with a simple and terrifying phrase, "And it came to pass that that evening came out the angel of the Lord and wounded in the camp of the Assyrians 185,000. And when they rose up at the tomorrow, I have here they were all corpses." One night only, a single act, a single angel, 185,000 warriors, men trained, ruthless, ready for the battle, fell without dew, a single shot. There was no combat. There was no noise of swords, there were no screams, only the invisible work of a divine hand. That did it really happen? Was it a sudden plague, a mysterious disease, or was it, like many they believe, a demonstration direct of the heavenly judgment? It is true that it was so clean, so silent, so absolute, that it cannot be explained by human means. The most feared army in the world was dismantled in a matter of hours, without anyone in Jerusalem had to move a single finger. And this is where the mystery deepens. The text does not describe as it did. It just says it was the angel of the mister. This character is not a messenger anyone. In many biblical texts, the angel of the Lord speaks like God, acts like God, receives worship, as if he were an incarnate divine manifestation. For many scholars and theologians, it is a theophany, an appearance of Christ before his incarnation as Jesus. If this is true, and many biblical evidence supports it suggest, then that night, the same eternal Son of God descended invisibly and executed judgment on the enemy of the people of God, an act of silent justice, a miracle without applause, a victory without witnesses, because there are times when God does not seek spectacle, he seeks only obedience, faith, silence. The Assyrians, who mocked God, were confronted by the power of the one whom they insulted, not with rays, not with fire from the sky, but with the inescapable weight of his holy presence. And when God enters battle, no one is left standing. The irony is brutal. The army that came to destroy was destroyed without not even being able to react. Pride of the empire was crushed by a single touch of eternity. That night, God did not need generals, armies, or human strategies. He only needed act, and everything changed. And Jerusalem slept. Nobody saw as it happened. There is no sufficient cinematic description that captures the mystery of that act. We only know that, when the sun rose, what they found was a field of corpses, absolute silence, total victory. Sennacherib, the king who defied God, fled. He returned to Nineveh humiliated, defeated, broken. And years later, he was killed by his own children in the temple of his god Nisroch, a poetic detail, an echo of the divine justice. God had answered, not with thunder, but with sovereignty. Not with weapons, but with his authority. And this one evening go on talking to us today. It reminds us that we will not always see the movement of God. Not always we will listen he roar of its intervention. But that doesn't mean it isn't acting. Because there is battles that only he, darling, go, and there is victories that only he, darling, can give. The dawn. It came upon Jerusalem like a gentle caress. The first good heavens of the sun, they painted the walls of the city with golden tones, as if the darling I would like to sign the miracle that had just happened. But no one in the city imagined what they were about to discover. The gates of Jerusalem slowly opened. The watchmen, fearful and curious, climbed the towers. What they saw let without words. An army dead. Hundreds of thousands of bodies lay lifeless in the valley, lying like leaves after a storm. There was no signs of struggle. There was no blood shed in the walls. No Israelite soldier had come out to fight, and yet threat had disappeared. It was like waking up from a nightmare to find that the reality is better than any hope. Terror had been defeated, but no one knew as the city was left in silence. not a silence of fear, but of reverent wonder. What there was past, who there was intervened, how to explain a victory without a fight. Hezekiah bowed down again in the temple, not to ask, but to give thanks, because in it, deeper than his heart, he knew God had fought. The same God who had been challenged, humiliated, blasphemed, had responded, and his answer was perfect, precise, and without a trace of doubt. On the other side of the disaster in Nineveh, Sennacherib, he arrived defeated. The king, who had promised to destroy Jerusalem, returned with empty hands, a lost gaze, and a soul consumed by the shame. Your army had been annihilated, his word shattered, its power ridiculed. The irony of his end is more than tragic. It was killed by his own children, while adored his god, Nisroch. The same man who mocked of the God of Israel died in the temple of a god. Don't let it happen could save. Poetic justice, divine justice. But the most amazing thing about this whole story was not the death of the soldiers nor the fall of an empire. The most powerful was his spiritual message that remained recorded in the history. God does not need noise to demonstrate his power. Faith true does not look for spectacle. Seek communion, seek surrender. And when that faith is expressed with sincerity, even in the silence, the heaven responds with miracles. Jerusalem won without lifting swords. Hezekiah expired without shouting. Isaiah prophesied without need for signs visible. And God showed that when he fight, it does with a force so great that it does not need to be seen, only believed. That sunrise frame a new beginning for the people. An eternal reminder that God's power is not limited by the human circumstances, that his glory does not depend on multitudes, that his justice arrives, although it seems to take a while. And today, that same true is still valid, because there is sunrises that just arrive after nights where God works secretly. A figure appears in several passages from the Old Testament, wrapped in mystery, power, and reverence. The angel of the Sur. It is not an angel does not carry simply messages, speak like God, act like God with divine authority, receives worship, and many sometimes his presence causes fear and holiness, as if the God himself would have manifested himself. Who is this character? In the evening in which the army Assyrian was destroyed, was precisely the angel of the Mister who descended and executed judgment. But this is not an isolated case. This angel appears with Abraham, stops Isaac's hand, speaks from the bramble burning with Moses. He leads the people of Israel, and now defeats 185,000 enemies in a single movement. Many theologians and scholars believe that this angel is none other than a manifestation pre-incarnate of Christ, a theophany, an apparition visible of the eternal Son before his birth in Bethlehem. Not about a messenger, but of the eternal Word who was with God and was God, as John 1:1 states. A warrior Christ, a fighting Christ, a Christ who appears not as the suffering lamb, but as the lion who protects his town. This perspective completely transforms the history we have explored. If it was Christ who descended that night, then we see an early portrait of his dual nature. Merciful to the yours, fearsome with the enemies of the faith. He did not need armies nor of rays, only of his word and its decision, and this connects with others, biblical scenes of silent divine intervention. When the walls of Jericho fell untouched, when Daniel was protected in a pit of the lions, when the Syrians did not see Elisha but were surrounded by chariots of fire, invisible, God has a pattern, a style. And that style many times consists of act in it invisible, in the unexpected, in what cannot be controlled by the man. And that is no coincidence. It is a constant invitation to live by faith, to trust when we don't see, to believe that even when the sky seems silent, he is working. The angel of the Lord is, then, more than a biblical figure. He is the symbol of power that does not seek human recognition. It is the image of the God who fights for us in the silence of the night, and that many times already ha cattle the battle, while us we are still praying. Jerusalem, she was saved. Not by swords, not by political treaties, not by human strategies. She was saved because someone dared to pray, because a king bowed down, because a prophet spoke, and because God, in his perfect sovereignty, decided act in it invisible. There were no witnesses that night. There were no public celebrations, only one dawn, and a field full of evidence that the darling there was intervened. And you, who have having come this far, you also face your own nights, your own fences. There are times when those who feel that you're surrounded, that there is no exit, that even God seems silent. But let me tell you something. God's silence is not absence. It is strategy. He's already fighting for you, even when he's not. You see, already has sent his answer, even when your prayer is still shaking in your lips. Already he'll lay out a way out, although everything you see be walls and shadows, because that is the God of Jerusalem, the God who fights alone, the God who works in the silence. Today, that history ancient, it's still alive, and it calls you to trust, to pray, to hope, to stand firm, even if you don't see he movement. Because when you trust in he invisible, the impossible becomes in history. And now, I want to invite you to do something important. Writes in the comments, I think in the God who fights my battles in silence. Do it as a statement of faith, as a testimony for others who also, they are surrounded by their own Assyrians. And if this history, if it touched your heart, if it inspired you, if it renewed your faith, don't leave without leave your like, share this video and subscribe to the channel. This way we can continue to unearth the hidden stories, the forgotten mysteries, and the battles invisible where God still go on acting, because in a world that screams, we need to remember that real power sometimes arrives without make noise.